Hey, Simplifiers, it's Evan Umberger. Today, I've got a great interview with my doppelganger, Lou Gajary. He's a great friend. We've known each other for like a decade. We've got the glasses, we got the beard, we kind of got the same body build. I've been working on mine a little bit. And he also works in marketing. And I really wanted for you guys to be able to hear his perspective. He's over at the McKinney Economic Development Corporation, just an incredible storyteller. And I just thought, man, you guys got to hear him. So without further ado, we're just going to jump right into the interview. Enjoy this conversation.
Hey, Evan, thanks for having me, man. This is going to be fun.
Oh yeah. Luke and I probably over a decade have been friends.
Something like that. Yeah.
We met probably in Coppell or, the DFW area, and just got to know each other, a mixture of church, a mixture of business. But let's just kind of hear more about where you've been and what you're doing. Love to talk about, how you mix the creative, strategy and frameworks and actually doing it in a high level in so many different areas. So Luke, I love for you just to roll with, your background and kind of where you are today.
Yeah, no, thanks, man. I it's been cool being a part of this. Love the messaging and methodology behind what you're doing. And I think simplicity is something we're all after and we're all craving. And so to get to talk about that through the lens of creativity, ideation, and frameworks for that is going to be pretty cool. So yeah, like you said, I've kind of had a career that hasn't been a linear graph. If you look at like a stocks chart where everything's just on an upward trajectory, my career has kind of been all over the place. I've served in ministry capacities. I've served in small teams. I've served in large corporate environments. I've ran my own businesses, built and shut down a large 6-figure startup SaaS company. And then currently now I'm employed full-time in the city of McKinney and have several, which is about 40 miles north of Dallas. And I've got several kind of side hustles going on. I help consult and serve churches with creative needs and processes, and then also write books. And, when I was 12 years old, I saved up $300 and bought a 1.3 megapixel digital camera at the time, which now it's like our phones, I think, are 48 megapixels, right? So I had this innate desire to create and to contribute and to capture stories. And at that time, the video recording on that digital camera did not capture any sound. So I had to be super creative with what I recorded because the visuals were all that mattered. And so it gave me a lot of inspiration. At that point, 12 or 13, I started leaning more into the idea of using video as a storytelling tool and using video to capture memories, and really gravitated towards that. And then, obviously later in my career, took some online courses, learned how to operate much more powerful, much better camera equipment as the years went on. But back in, 2001, that was all I had to work with. So have always gravitated towards, again, communication, storytelling. And I've learned to give myself less of a label in a career. Here's what I do. I'm a digital marketer, or I'm a graphic designer, or I'm a videographer. And I've more just realized I am a communicator, and there's multiple different platforms in which that can happen, whether that's from a stage, a book, a podcast, or a digital medium. So that's kind of my long intro of where I'm at now. And we can kind of dive into some of the nitty gritty of each of those things too. But yeah, that's kind of the origin story of how I got where I am now.
Yeah. I mean, that's huge to be able to think about, okay, some people do, I'm just a videographer. And then like, I remember even in school, they're like, here's a multimedia, I think it was in the department was like journalism, mass communication at
Sure.
and they're like, you can do multimedia. Let's take these awesome videos and just use the audio version and, use it for podcasts. I think just your approach, I've always loved to see how you've woven story into everything you've done. I mean, you've got a book out, you've helped massive organizations be able to capture their testimonies. I mean, just your methodology has just been something that, it takes a little bit of a non-linear person to be able to go, oh, okay, this is actually a little bit of the framework of how you can share your story. And but then just the way you've done it, it's just been so great to be able to see.
No, I appreciate that. Yeah, I think storytelling is, what's the point if we're not telling story? Like, stories are what capture people's attention. Stories are what drives marketing and messaging, and stories are what entertain us. And I think of some of the best stories, like the Detroit Lions in the NFL are just so much fun to watch, not because they're any better than the Patriots were a couple years ago or the Chiefs are now, but they're fun to watch because there's this story of grit, determination, resilience. Dan Campbell, the coach, used to play for the team and now has gone back to Detroit and built from the ashes this amazing organization that is crushing it right now. So I care about watching the Detroit Lions, not because I care about football and statistics, but because I love the story, right? And so I think that's where stories play such a powerful factor, whether that's again, in my current context, working in a local municipality, or whether that's working with a church, or whether that's working with a real estate broker or developer about their community. Stories transcend industry and can articulate and create framework for good messaging and creativity.
What are just some of those ways that, just practically you can be able, to work with an expert that, could get into all the jargon, and they can get into all the little nerdy things maybe about what they love to do, but there's got to be some framework, like you said. There's got to be some guardrails and some guidelines. What are some things that you like to be able to use?
Yeah, I think so. You say story, and you say, like, I've heard facts tell, stories sell. You say that sounds really good, right? But then it's like, okay, what is a story? How do I take if I'm a plumber and I have a plumbing company that's been around for 20 years, how do I take that and market it in messaging that is story driven and not what you see a lot of times? If you go to like a plumber's website, you click the about section and it says their story, right? That people don't connect with that. So what I have found to help define a story for an organization or a business was one of my favorite frameworks or methodologies, the StoryBrand Framework by Donald Miller. And I immediately gain respect for somebody if they're in the marketing industry and they start talking about Donald Miller and the StoryBrand Framework. And there's a certification you can take and all that crazy stuff, but there's also a lot of great just free resources and templates. And his book, Marketing Made Simple, is amazing, probably very on brand with what you're doing here. And there's just an idea that you are not the hero of the story. The customer is the hero and you become the guide. So one thing Donald Miller talks a lot about is the idea of Star Wars, right? We see Luke Skywalker as the hero, and then Yoda or Obi-Wan Kenobi are the guides in that. And so when it comes to relating to your audience, you're not the hero, you're the guide. You're the Yoda, you're the Obi-Wan Kenobi. Your customer is the hero, and it's your job to make them successful, whether you're a plumber or a real estate investor or a graphic designer working in a large company. Your job is to help other people win along the way. And the old Zig Ziglar quote, if you help enough people get what they want, eventually you'll find yourself getting what you're after. And so that's, again, great story writing framework that's baked into every Hollywood movie you see. Donald Miller's StoryBrand.
What would you say is maybe like a kid friendly, movie that kind of even has that same kind of story arc?
Yeah, I mean, one of my favorite movies right now with my son, he watches it all the time, is Cars 3. You see Lightning McQueen and what's the yellow car's name? I can't remember. It's the female hero of the story. The two of them, yeah. He's the guide and she's the hero. I say it's one of my favorite movies right now, and then I forget one of the main characters' name. But they work together, and Lightning McQueen ends up realizing he's not the hero anymore. It's his co-star's time to shine. He becomes the guide, right? And so I think a lot of us as business owners or entrepreneurs have to start to realize there's a shift that needs to happen in the way that we lead, in the way that we tell our stories, in the way that we connect with our audience. Man, nobody likes to hear from the guy with the big ego who's won X amount of championships and is the best in the world and he knows it. They want to know, how are you going to help me, right? So that's the messaging and the articulation of what we're after.
It's such a simple, quick fix. It's like being able to not talk about just you and everything that you've done and here's why I'm the best at whatever else. But when you realize, oh, who's this for? Oh, it's for the audience. It's for the person who's in pain. They have some sort of internal pain. They have an external pain. And they need to know that you've overcome and you know the path of how
Yeah.
to be able to get there. So what are some of those beliefs that even you've pushed through, either a mentality, there's a mindset that was a limiting belief maybe, or maybe
Yeah.
there was an external force that you were pressured and you were able to break through?
Yeah. I'll kind of give an example from my current context of a quote that I was actually dealing with today. One book that I've fallen in love with when it's talking about development or real estate or local government is a book called For the Love of Cities. It's by the author Peter Kageyama. It's an amazing just narrative on how you can fall in love with the area in which you live and bring back life into your community. And I bookmarked a quote from him. It says, the way to change the narrative is not to try to shout down the older narrative, but to give people lots of other stuff to talk about. Not advertising, not PR, but real stories about real people doing really cool stuff. Every community has great stuff happening that flies underneath the media radar. We don't necessarily need to produce more stuff. We just need to shine a light on things that are already going on and celebrate the stories that are happening in the so-called long tail, the less mainstream, smaller, and more localized aspects of community. So said another way, if you think about your city, if the city, and I've lived in areas like this, the city makes any progress in any area and citizens immediately jump on the Facebook or go to city council and say, what about the roads? When are you going to fix the roads? Right. And so in this case, it's how do we, instead of just trying to beat people up for asking about the roads, let's spotlight areas where we are crushing it and we are winning. Not to say there's not areas that need to be improved or things that need to be fixed, but how can we celebrate and communicate the awesome stuff happening? And eventually you can't just throw out that old narrative that the roads are bad and they're trash and I hate driving in this town. But eventually people will start to rally around and celebrate, wow, despite hitting every pothole known to man on the way to work today, like my town is doing some really cool stuff that's worth getting behind and celebrating. So that's an area that kind of comes to mind, talking about limiting belief or reframing narratives. And another one is, for me, is just, I am terrible at creating white space in my calendar. And what I mean by that is room to breathe, stop and think, rush from meeting to meeting, book meetings back to back with maybe a 5-minute bio break in the middle, right? We just go from thing to thing to thing. And the more I've built into my schedule, I found the less creative I am, because I actually, like, your brain needs time to think. Was listening, I can't remember the name of the person who said this, but I was listening to a training about time management. And they said that if you will block up to about 2 hours a day to give yourself white space, just to sit and think, stare at the wall, don't get on your phone, just sit and think, that your brain activates a much more creative part of itself, and you become, it seems counterintuitive. It's just 2 hours. I could book meetings, or I could write content, or I could fill in the blank, but you actually are producing better quality of everything you're doing by giving your brain just room to breathe and think. I don't fully understand that. I haven't fully figured it out, but it's a rabbit that I'm chasing right now.
Well, it reminds me of Perry Marshall talking about Renaissance time. Have you heard him talk about that? It's a very similar idea, that some of the best inventions have come from, just like you're booking your meeting, or you're booking, the time of the work, that you actually book in Renaissance time. And it actually, like you're saying, it allows for your muscles to relax. It allows for your brain to, you may have, a problem that you're trying to deal with, but the way that you get there in the path, you don't have as much traffic.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
It's kind of like, okay, you could drive an hour, up and down 75, or, 380 or 121 up in North Dallas. But if you just drove north, I remember one time driving up on the tollway, and I went past 380, and it just kind of went into this farmland.
Yeah.
And it's now being more developed, but at that point, like, it took, like, I needed a break. I just needed Like, I just need to go drive for a little bit. And I think I had an hour for a lunch break, and I was working in Frisco, and I was like, I'm going to see how far I can go in 30 minutes.
Yeah. No, been there. Yeah.
I'm not even going to eat anything. I'm just going to drive for 30 minutes. I'm going to drive back to the office. And what was so phenomenal was like, oh, there's downtown Dallas way far over there, but you just didn't have the hustle around you. And your mind needs that too. It's why, you work for 6 days and you take a 7th off, and like, but adding that into, the rhythm of your week, the rhythm of your day can really produce that type of renaissance, meaning it can produce a new perspective. It can produce, new approaches to things, and probably even provide solutions to the problems that you're facing, even though you're not actively, I'm working, I'm trying to do this.
That's
it's
it.
like, you need to be able to sleep. You need to be able to relax. You need to be able to have the time when you're not gritting it.
Yeah. And I remember that episode of Parks and Rec where Leslie Knope is trying to come up with the next big idea, and Ron Swanson locks her in the room and says, "You're not coming out of here until you sleep." Right.
Right.
And then she gets these breakthroughs and has all these ideas, but it was like almost counterintuitive. The going for it produced nothing. And then the relaxation and the taking a break is what opened the floodgates to the next season of, her decisions that needed to be made. So I think a lot about that too, even in the stage of career that I'm in, right? Like the further you go, if you're in a creative career, or if you work starting out, you're in an agency, or you're a freelancer, or you're whatever job you're in, you start out in the stuff, right? Your 20s and your 30s, you're grinding away, becoming a master at your craft, and you're very hands-on, very in the weeds. Then as you approach your 40s and 50s, you become more of the guide, right? Your job is now to think big picture strategy. You're hopefully escalating into more of a leadership position. So now I'm kind of in this transitional phase of my career where it's like, I'm not getting, it'd be better and more advantageous for me to think big picture strategy, super creative solutions, and less valuable for me to be putting together an InDesign document. You know what I mean? Like, and
Right.
put that in whatever context that looks like, whether you deal with spreadsheets or, other types of content that you create. There comes a point where the problems you solve are at a much more creative and strategic level, and all the more reason to take those creative brain breaks, step back and go, man, I need to stop clicking my mouse for a minute, and I need to start thinking about, zoom out, 30,000 foot view. How can I solve these problems in a higher level?
Right. And just the trickle down that has on the team that you're leading, being able to model that for yourself, and then for others to be able to recognize, like, that's especially helpful for those that are maybe a little bit younger, and that, it's like, well, I gave you a whole day to be able to do this, or whatever the context is. And they're like, yeah, but it's not just the day and the time that you said. It's even maybe the day before or that week. Like, we're not all just up and to the right, until infinity.
Right. Yeah.
It's that, the people that you're leading need that, they need that time. It's like, it pains me to hear about different companies where the leader is, and I actually just talked to another guest about this, where the leader is, taking a month off, and they could never take 1 or 2 weeks in a row. It's like,
right.
I literally want so many people, like, go take a break. Like,
Yeah.
even going for way too long, please go do that. But it's just got to be built into, rhythms. It's got to be built into the culture that, hey, they're going to go enjoy their long birthday weekend. They're going to enjoy, Thanksgiving. And like, I remember one time someone going, hey, I'm going to go to Europe, but just let me know if you need anything. I said, I will not.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Go enjoy your trip. I'll see you when you give back.
There is nothing. And at the end of the day, like, if you work in, fire, police, rescue, first responder, there are literally lives on the line if you leave your job. Like nurses, like, there are things you need to show up to work to save lives. But for most of us, mean, if I don't respond to an email for 24 hours, no one's dying, right? We put so much urgency on stuff that it's like, and again, I take my job very seriously. I'm very quick to respond. I'm very quick. I'm very good at communicating. But at the end of the day, if there's stuff going on in my family, or if there's a mental health issue that I'm experiencing where I'm like, I just need space to breathe. Let's be honest, like the city of McKinney is not going to fall apart, right? The churches that I serve are not going to close down on Sunday if I don't get an email done or miss a deadline. You know what I mean? Like I have had to learn to give myself a little more grace, still maintain excellence and good communication, but also to go like, let's put things in the perspective, big picture here. Like everything's fine. You're not that important. The world will spin on without you. Take a day off, right?
Yeah. You know, I even love to hear that from different business leaders that are like, hey, I'm going to take on this new contract and this is when I'm off. You know, or like they're just making it clear, or once they're engaged, they're like, hey, this is my kid's break, or, you know, this, whatever the case may be, whatever the context is. I think it's just very important to unplug, for rest, and, you know, so that when you're able to come back, you're able to be refreshed, and you're able to be able to contribute, at a level that you want to.
100%. And it's something to where it's a long game. It's not a sprint, right? Like I could work really hard and have an amazing productive couple of weeks, but what's that going to do for my entire rest of the year, right? I want to finish out my career in a healthy way. I want to be 80 years old, looking back on my life, sipping sweet tea on the porch with my wife and be happy with how things went, not in a hospital bed because I burned myself out, gave myself 3 heart attacks. You know, like this is a long game. And Brady Boyd, he's an author and a pastor. He wrote one of my favorite books about this called Addicted to Busy. It is like creating white space, he talks about this American culture of just rush into everything. Not so much zooms in on the creative aspect, but just the work-life balance in general, kind of like we're talking about.
What's like just maybe one piece of advice from that book, or just like a favorite leadership advice you've had from a previous boss or a mentor or someone in your life?
Man, that's a tough one. I think one of my favorite pieces of advice that I quote all the time is actually from a mutual friend, Danny McDaniel. The direction of your life is determined by the people you meet, the books you read, and the places you go. And so I've made it a point I heard that on very early in my career, and made it a point to surround myself with really quality people that are chasing what I chase, or at least were of the like mind and values. And then read a lot of books that are maybe outside the bubble of what I'm used to. And then go places that are different, that are interesting. My wife and I have a rule that I've implemented in our marriage. When we're traveling, you're not allowed to eat at any chain restaurants or any restaurants you have back home. You have to eat somewhere. Now with kids, it's gotten harder, right? Sometimes you just got to get a Happy Meal. Like, but for family dinners or meals we've planned, we're not going to Olive Garden. We're not going to Applebee's, TGI Fridays. Like we're going somewhere unique, local to that context. So the places you go, that's obviously a very silly kind of specific example about like what we eat, but where you go determines who you become in a lot of ways, in conjunction with those other, those other items as well.
Well, let's go into a place that you just went.
Adobe Max. Okay. Wow. That's a great segue. I didn't even mean to do that. Adobe Max in Miami was awesome. I've been fortunate that my employer pays for me to go and receive training, and I got credentialed with some or certified with some Adobe certifications. But Adobe does a really good job of, Max is a conference where you gather creatives from multiple industries. There's government, there's educators, there's agency owners, and met a guy that works for a artwork supply company, right? So he's a creative director there. So you just meet people from all kinds of industries. About 10,000 creatives gather. They have some inspirational keynotes that are meant to kind of drive creativity in your life and give you kind of a meal to snack on. And then you get labs, you get hands-on training, you get to participate with Adobe experts. And I got to eat lunch with one of the lead developers behind Adobe Illustrator one of the days, which was a total accident. That's a cool story. But met a guy from Sweden who was a marketing officer with a startup who's kind of, he his startup got acquired, and he's taken his payday and taken like a 2-year sabbatical from work and just traveling. And his first stop was the US from Sweden. So like you just met these creatives from all kinds of walks of life and all kinds of situations. And again, kind of that idea of not everything is about work. It is, but it's also like, you got to kind of slow down to speed up sometimes and step back, get trained, get educated, get re-inspired. And, yeah, of course it was in Miami, which I'm fond of because my wife and I honeymooned part of our honeymoon there.
Oh, that's right.
And so it was a lot of fun, just a ton of culture and creativity and public art everywhere, and just really, really beautiful spot.
Right. And when you go to these new places, I mean, you meet new people and you build relationships, and you're able to like experience something that you never would have, that's going to inspire you to be able to go back. And, it's the people that you're around, the books you read, the podcasts you listen to, the places you go, that can really shape the direction. I mean, can you give an example of how just over the course of your career that's been like, I'm now going in this direction?
Yeah, I've thought for a long time that the best way to be a creative is to kind of be a hermit. And like, you think of the writer who's writing a book and they go to a cabin in the woods for 4 weeks and write their book and then come back, and they've, like Moses returning from the mountain with the tablets, they've become this expert on this topic and they've written. And so I always lean towards more kind of self-isolating when doing creative work. And then I remember actually we're at the Abilene Zoo, and this messed with me. This kind of changed my thinking about isolation and creativity. We were at the Abilene Zoo a couple years ago, and it's just fun. It's a great zoo for little kids. It's a small zoo. You can see the whole thing in about 90 minutes. I'm there with my 5-year-old and 3-year-old at the time, and they have a gender reveal for a new baby giraffe that was born. Like when parents do like a cut the cake and it's pink or blue, they had already had the giraffe been born, but they were unveiling to the public what the gender was of this new baby giraffe. So the inside of the cake was pink. And then we went up to the top of the giraffe enclosure, and they're giving tours and telling everybody about giraffes. And the zookeeper said something that kind of caught my attention. She said, that giraffe over there is named, whatever his name was, Jim or whatever. And they've got about a 29 to 31 year life expectancy. That one is 17 years old. So he's about halfway. And she said that in the wild, they live about 18 to 20 years. And I said, I would think it'd be opposite. In captivity, they'll live 29 to 31 years. In the wild, it's almost half that. Why do they live shorter in the wild? And she said, well, because what happens is in the wild, when they get older, they isolate, and they're more susceptible to attacks. They're more susceptible to not being taken care of. They're more susceptible to poachers and wild animals. And so you separate, you isolate, and their life expectancy is shorter because of the predicament they put themselves in by being isolated. And I'm like, man. And this, I'm thinking like in a COVID, post-COVID world, where what happened during COVID, we all had to isolate, and it did wonders in a bad way for our mental health. We all took a beating in our mental health. Why? Because we're isolated. So I thought, man, giraffes have got it figured out. Like when they stay together, they live longer. And I think the same thing is true of our creative ability, of our work ethic, of our joy in our work. It lasts longer when you're with people that you enjoy. People don't quit their jobs. They quit people. You don't leave a job because you hate the desk. You leave a job because you can't stand your micromanager boss. And so I have worked to undo that in myself, to say, I'm not going to isolate as much. I'm going to work to connect. So yeah, the job I'm at now, I only got because of a mutual friend through working with Advocare at the time. I don't want to say I only got it because of her, but Madison Clark was a friend.
Yeah,
we worked together in the past, and they were hiring an internal marketing person 3 years ago. And I began the interview process and reached out to her. And it was not because my resume looked awesome, although it does. It was because I had a friend, another giraffe, I said, I want to work with this person. I want to be in community with this person. And so that's kind of, it's about who you know, places you go, people you meet, and books you read, and that's a pretty clear-cut example.
Well, and, you see that in churches, you see that in, community centers. Like we joined the Jewish Community Center in Overland Park, and it's just widened up. I mean, because of the coaches that I'm around, and like just the encouragement, the types of people it can change the course and the direction of your life.
Yeah. And we look out for each other. It's a huge shift. You can live as a hermit in your own basement or closet and be fine, but life's a whole lot better when you do it with other people, and like you said, in multiple contexts.
So if you could just go back in time and talk to your younger Luke, who's the real hero, what would you, as the guide, tell him about, ways to break through earlier, faster? Hey, watch out for this.
I would go back and tell him to buy a bunch of Bitcoin early back in 2012. No, but I put an enormous amount of pressure on myself to get really good at one thing and grow that, right? That linear trajectory of that upward and to the right constant movement. And I went through seasons where I wasn't making as much money as I had in the past, or I'm making, we are in a bigger house now, in a smaller house now. Like, our living situation has changed and our income has changed. And I put so much pressure on first 5 years of marriage to have, building a career and a family at the same time. Like, the career's got to go upward, the family's got to go upward, our income has to go upward. And I'm like, man, I wish, even so, I'm still learning this, but I wish I took more time to, connect with people better, just master my craft and get really good at what I'm doing in the moment, instead of always thinking about the next thing. Like, is this going to build the next step? Is this the right next step? Is this good for right now? Or is it like, what you're doing right now is what you're supposed to be doing, and it may look different. It may not be as clear cut or linear as things look in books and movies. It's going to be a little bit of a winding road, ups and downs, and that's normal. And guess what? Everybody's doing it that way. None of us have it figured out. Some of us are just better at looking like we do, right? So I would encourage myself not to fall for the myth that everything's got to be perfect. You've got to chase this linear trajectory. I think about the idea of, like, for the example of like hosting someone in your home. I think a lot of things, you're building a life and a career, and you may not learn your best lessons in college or in a training. You may not learn your best, there's so much education and personal growth that happens. And I've tried to get really good at like using a Notion document just to take notes of everything that's happening in my life. You got Notion? Yeah. Oh, dude.
Oh yeah.
I'm like, where has Notion been? Anyway, but like, my wife, whenever she goes through the drive-through, she will get her order and then ask for extra napkins, because we have 3 little kids and they always need more napkins. And then what'll happen is she'll stash them in the glove box. And so we've got this thick of napkins in our, like 3 inches thick of napkins in our glove box, because every time she goes through a drive-through, she's stashing some in there. And then guess what? A kid spills their water or throws up in the car. Sorry, it's disgusting. And then now you have a stack of napkins. And so I've tried to go through life, gotten better the past couple of years of like, wherever I go, whoever I talk to, I'm taking a few napkins out of that conversation and stuffing it in my career glove box. I got to meet the CEO of Independent Financial, a large bank in Texas and Colorado, and just ask him questions. I was in a room with 8 other people, and this $2 billion valuation bank, financial institution. I'm getting to meet the CEO who built this company from the ground up in the 80s. And I just get to ask him some questions. Guess what? Those are some napkins going in my glove box. And I'm building a set of conversational skills, right? So like, at the same time, then I'm in a room at Adobe Max learning how to create better workflows in Adobe Premiere with 150 other classmates. So you can learn in a variety of different contexts. Are we taking those napkins, storing them in our glove box for when situations will come up where we'll need them?
We do the same thing, but it's usually like Chick-fil-A sauce.
Do that too. That's another side of the glove box. Yeah.
I always do as many as I can.
Yeah. Max out the app, bro. Yeah. 100%.
So yeah. Well, Luke, this has just been amazing. There's so many things I need to put in my glove box. What's a good way for someone just to connect with you and stay in touch with what you're doing?
Yeah, LinkedIn is great. I'm somewhat active on Instagram as too, but LinkedIn is going to get more of the kind of like napkins, if you will, like that conversation I had with David Brooks from Independent Financial. I've documented on LinkedIn, and I'm pretty active on there. And then I've got some books you can check out on Amazon, that kind of stuff. Would love to just connect and be a resource however I can in any of this stuff. I've certainly not arrived, but love talking all things creative energy, time management, all that stuff, how we're driven by different ideas and people, like all that stuff is so much fun to talk about.
What are the books?
So I've got a handful of them. One of them I wrote called From Hunter Harvest. It's my entrepreneurship journey on how I built a 6-figure SaaS platform with a partner. And I've got a book on mental health for teenagers. I've got a book on storytelling, how to tell your story well to people around you. Tell It Well is the name of that one.
Great. Well, Luke, I really appreciate you coming on, and we'd love to have you back on and just share the progress and keep on going.
Man, appreciate you. Thanks for all you're doing to speak into the lives of people in a simplistic and creative way. So it's a super cool product you guys are pumping out, and I'm happy to be a part of it. Thanks for having me.
Hey, what I tell you, an incredible conversation. I just love the fact that being able to take napkins, take the things that you may not need right now, but you're going to need in the future. Take those aspects, those concepts from other people, and digest them. Use them when it's appropriate. Obviously, we were talking about, Chick-fil-A napkins or Chick-fil-A sauce, but how does that apply to what you're doing and what you're building? Let me know. I'd love to hear from you. I'm working on some resources that I know you're going to love. So if you're interested and want to be the first to know, just DM me the word storytelling and we'll go from there. Until next time, keep it simple, Saints.